8 weeks into their campaign to recapture the Falklands, British commanders faced a daunting challenge. Argentine missiles had destroyed the troop-carrying helicopters that were to carry the men from the beachhead at San Carlos to the Argentine positions around Port Stanley. Marines and paras had no option but to walk the 65 miles in sub-zero temperatures, carrying all their equipment.
We had about a week in the open without sleeping bags or anything. The CO marched with us. One thing I must say, our officers always led by example. And what we did, they did.
We moved mostly by night. We thought we probably had an element of surprise because it was very dark. We did not necessarily think the Argentines would expect us.
The further that 3 Brigade marched from San Carlos, the more they were cut off from supplies and ammunition. Stanley was heavily defended by Argentine troops spread across the surrounding mountains. 3 Para's first task was to take Mount Longdon. It was held by 300 Argentine conscripts, with 500 more in reserve. These inexperienced young troops had been based there for nearly 2 months. Hunger and cold had become the main enemy for men like Louis Lecese.
Regrettably, all we thought about was eating, eating, eating. All we had was soup, just water, you know. Nothing in it, just water. A couple of times we were given bubble gum. That's what we ate, bubble gum.
5 miles away in Stanley, there was plenty of food for officers, but little reached the men in the mountains. Hungry conscripts caught scavenging food down in the capital were treated brutally.
When the soldiers were discovered, they were staked flat on the ground, legs and arms wide apart. They were tied to stakes from tents by their wrists and ankles. They were left there in the open air for many hours. They were numb because of the cold and the wind.
The 600 men of 3 Para planned a surprise attack on Mount Longdon under cover of darkness. At its base lay an Argentine minefield, clearly marked today. In 1982, it was not. What followed was never filmed, but the battle for Mount Longdon has been reconstructed using the stories of the men who fought there.
I got the company together and I said, look lads, we don't know exactly what's up there. Some of us are not going to come back from this, so if you've got somebody you want to speak to, I suggest you go away and have a little word with them.
We were told in no uncertain terms that some of us, indeed, would not be seeing the sunrise the next day. And I said ta-ra to a couple of my friends who indeed didn't see the sunrise the next day.
With the grim order to fix bayonets, the Paras advanced silently up Mount Longdon.
The initial advance towards the foot of the mountain was silent and without event until a corporal in B Company hit a mine.
The blast blew the man's leg off. All surprise was lost. In a trench near the summit, Felix Barreto heard the cry.
The soldier screamed, a piercing scream, as if he had been stabbed. That's when we reacted. After that, it was all screams.
What came down was like black ball illuminations as people woke up, got out their trenches, and started opening up with their various weapons. Realising we were in a minefield, as we were running to try and get to some cover, the fire was increasing all the time.
The 150 men of B Company leading the charge met a deadly hail of bullets.
I just kept going, kept walking into this hell in front of me. You either fight or you run away from it. It was an intense feeling of fear. My stomach was really knotted tight. My legs felt heavy and stiff. You suddenly sort of switch into this role of almost like a robotic machine fighting forward. Men going in, eyeball to eyeball, bayonet to bayonet.
We realized they had bayonets because we heard them close. Our combat was hand-to-hand, 5 to 6 meters maximum. And their screams resembled the wild cries of a football match. That's how they advanced, screaming.
Despite their weeks on the freezing mountain, the conscripts put up stiff resistance. After 3 hours of hand-to-hand fighting, B Company, spearheading the attack, was still pinned down by a heavy-caliber machine gun.
Because they were so well established in these rocky positions, they simply could not be shifted. There were some very dark moments. Bearing in mind this was the most intense experience of battle that any of us had ever had. And there were moments when one thought, what the hell more do we have to do to win this?
If the machine gun wasn't silenced, the paras could be forced off the mountain. Along with other NCOs, Corporal Ian Bailey grabbed the initiative.
You've got to lead from the front, and that's the whole part of leadership. You can't tell somebody to go up and do something if you're not going to do it yourself.
Corporal Bailey and Platoon Sergeant Ian Mackay weighed up the options.
It was Ian Mackay, he was the platoon sergeant. We got together and had a chat about how we were going to deal with this machine gun. And it was decided that fire support would come from our right, and we would move under that and trying to get in to take out the position. And I was shouting to Ian to move forward. Go, go! As I stood up, a position at the bottom of the rocks, which we hadn't seen, fired. I got hit in the right hip. Ian went on his own. He assaulted the position on his own, killed the enemy in there, took over the 50 caliber. I later found out he got killed in that position. He was awarded the Victoria Cross for his actions because obviously it had taken out a major weapon system.
I think he just decided that sod it. He just decided to pull the grenades and run at it. And he did so and dropped them and got hit on the way in and then just dropped the grenades. Very brave man.
I lay there, looking up at the stars, thinking lots of thoughts, listening to the battle going on, but there was no immediate movement around me. I rolled over to try and get into a better position, and at that point I was shot again in the back of the neck, and a tracer round landed on my hand, which was directly in front of my face, and I just watched it burn. But because the enemy was so close, 20 feet away, I wasn't going to give my position away, and I decided then I was going to play dead and just lie there.
By dawn, after 12 hours of fighting, B Company had a foothold on the summit of Mount Longdon, and there was help at last for Ian Bailey.
And then I heard a friendly voice, and I shouted out, "I'm injured, I'm forward of you." I got carried down the mountain by our cooks, they're our stretcher bearers. And every time mortar rounds or artillery rounds were coming in, they would lay across my body and protect me. They did a wonderful job. I've always had the utmost respect for chefs ever since then. Hardest course in the army. Nobody's passed it yet to cook properly, but at that particular time, good lads.
The Argentines fell back to Stanley, leaving 50 men dead on the mountain. 3 para had also paid a price for this victory. 18 dead, 35 wounded.
When the sun came up, it began to show the true horror of what we've just come through. That there was a sort of a mist that hovered just over the floor. And sticking out of this mist was the stiffened arms, limbs of corpses. And it made quite an effect on me.
After the battle, news cameras recorded the scene on the mountain.
The battlefield, it smelt of death. That sort of horrible, rather rich smell of death. All the impedimenta of military fighting was there, scattered all over the mountain. Ammunition, weaponry, food. It takes a few hours after a night battle to establish what has happened and who is missing, who is dead. I found that whole experience of this news gradually being collected deeply, really very deeply distressing, because it was my plan, my battalion. I was responsible for all these soldiers, and one felt no sense of triumph whatsoever. One felt a huge sense of waste, really, that so many young men had lost their lives for this pile of rock.
Three Para waited for an Argentine counterattack from Stanley, but none came. Instead, the enemy shelled the mountain. The Paras were to endure a terrifying bombardment for 48 hours. After the fierce hand-to-hand night battle on Mount Longdon, the men of 3 Para were being pounded by heavy Argentine shelling.
These artillery barrages were very intense, and it was very, very frightening. In fact, I sometimes wonder, you know, what was more frightening, actually fixing bayonets and walking up that mountain, or actually sitting there and having to take this bombardment. You don't have any control of your destiny, and it's literally lady luck, you know, whether you survive it or not.
When he volunteered to collect new maps and a resupply of cigarettes, Denzil Connick's luck ran out.
I wanted to, in a way, selfishly, secure my own ration of cigarettes. That's when I got caught out in the open with a shell. So I ended up smoking a lot more than I expected, really. There was hardly any warning. It was just a rush of air, a screaming noise, and bang, that was it. Took off my left leg from the hip.
Connick was hit by a 105mm shell. The 2 paratroopers with him were killed.
I just remember screaming for Wales at the time. And I was just hanging on for everything I had. Because I just knew I was dying, and I was dying very quickly. I just wanted to go to sleep. An overwhelming feeling of tiredness. And I knew if I was to allow myself the comfort and the warmth of that sleep, I would never wake up again. So to prevent myself from sleeping, and it was mainly through blood loss, I kept this mental picture of my mother in my mind, because I knew that my passing would give her so much grief that there was just no way I was going to do that to her. Absolutely no way. They got me into the field hospital. I just remember asking the guy, look, you know, I just really want to go to sleep. Is it all right if I go to sleep? Promise me I won't die. He said, no, you'll be all right. Just go to sleep. And I did. And I died. But luckily, obviously, they resuscitated me. And that was it. I just remember waking up the next morning and feeling like hell, but I was alive.
Casualties from both sides were brought down the mountain. Ian Bailey, hit 3 times attacking the heavy machine gun position, finally reached a first aid post, but there was a queue of wounded.
The doctors put me under a blanket, put me in an outbuilding. Perhaps I wasn't as I wasn't easy to save, perhaps. I had 3 injuries, and there was other people who they could save. And looking at prioritisation of when you have a major incident, they had to prioritise, and I was put to one side. I remember waking up with somebody tapping on my arm, and it was a naval rating of some description, blue shirt, and I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, are you here to give blood?" And I remember pulling back the blanket and said, "I think I've given enough." And he nearly had heart failure, I think. He ran out, a doctor came in, and you could see the look on their face. I was thinking, they've forgotten about me. They took me straight out to the Uganda, which was the hospital ship. I had 7 operations to patch me all up. And the next day, everything stopped.
Mount Longdon was taken, but Argentine units still occupied threatening positions in the heights above Port Stanley. 2 more bloody battles on Mount Harriet and Mount Two Sisters were about to be fought by Marines from 3 Brigade. Meanwhile, 5 Brigade had arrived from Britain, 2,000 men from the Scots and Welsh Guards and the Gurkhas. They were to take other mountain positions surrounding Port Stanley. The men of 3 Brigade had already slogged to the mountains round Stanley and fought bitter battles there. Now the plan was for 5 Brigade to attack from the south, using Fitzroy as its base. The assault ship Intrepid would first take the Scots Guards there. Halfway, the ship's captain decided it was too dangerous to go on and ordered the guards to complete the journey in small assault boats. Ewan Southby Taylor, the landing craft commander, had serious doubts.
I knew we had an advance ahead of us, probably an 8-hour journey without charts. And it's not the good thing to say as a junior, or as a Marine major, to turn to the forwarding captain of a capital ship in his own bridge and said, "I'm sorry, sir, but I think the whole thing stinks." And he said, "I don't really think you should speak to me like that," and quite rightly. And I said, "Well, one thing, if this doesn't work, I want you to remember those are my last words to you."
We were launched in assault boats in the middle of the night to complete the journey into Bluff Cove. As we did so, the weather got worse and worse, the waves got higher, and the wind got stronger. There was lashings of water all over the place.
Without warning, the 4 landing craft came under fire. Southby Taylor's worst fears had been realised.
Suddenly we saw a warship approach us. It started lobbing illuminating shells over us. We hadn't a clue whether it was friend or foe. Eventually we discovered that this was a naval ship from the task force. It didn't know that we were going to be there. We didn't know it was going to be there. And I guess that's what you call the fog of war.
At dawn, as the Guards' assault boats closed in on Fitzroy, an Argentine observation post some miles away on Mount Harriet spotted them. They feared a new British landing had begun.
It seemed to me that because of the movement on the ground, they were disembarking troops and supplies. So I immediately notified Port Stanley that a landing was taking place.
The Scots Guards went ashore after 8 weary hours at sea. British commanders decided it would be safer to send the Welsh Guards waiting at San Carlos in a bigger landing ship, Sir Galahad. But there was no way of communicating this between San Carlos and Fitzroy. No one in Fitzroy knew about this plan.
And at dawn, the person who woke me up said, "Ewan, I think you can believe this, but Galahad is now at anchor alongside us." And I rushed up, and there she was, full of half the Welsh Guards.
Anchored at Fitzroy Cove with Sir Galahad was her sister ship, Sir Tristram, which had sailed round packed with ammunition. The 2 were prime targets for enemy aircraft.
I saw 2 vessels from Pleasant Bay. I requested planes to try and stop the landing.
Southby Taylor quickly climbed aboard Sir Galahad and urged senior officers from the Guards to get their men ashore.
And I said, well, look, my advice as the Task Force Landing Craft Squadron Commander, you must get off. And he wasn't interested, and he saw that I was a major. And he said, no, I don't take orders from Romney majors. I said, oh, for God's sakes, and my advice to you is you must get off.
But it was too late. Skyhawk jets, led by Brigadier Ruben Zini, were closing in.
We were flying very low. Second Lieutenant Gomez, the youngest officer in the group, sighted one of the ship's masts, but not the hull, because it was hidden by the hill. The result was an excellent attack, where we caught both English ships by surprise.
Both ships were hit. On board Sir Galahad, it was mayhem.
I watched the two ships being bombed, and I felt a rage I'd never felt before in my life, ever. These were our own men, and of course, to my mind, it had been totally avoidable.
Sir Galahad's ammunition blew up. The Welsh Guards were engulfed by the inferno.
And I ran down to the beach, about half a mile away, to find people already coming ashore, badly wounded. And I then stripped down shirt sleeves and carried stretchers for an hour or so.
We did what we could for them. They came off the ship. We tried to patch up those that we could.
That one was hit twice already on the back.
From Mount Harriet, Colonel Arroyo had a bird's-eye view.
It makes you say, well, I'm at war. This is not a movie. I saw that action as something happening at a distance. Perhaps I get emotional when I think about it now, but then I couldn't think of the English soldiers that were burning.
At the Ajax Bay Field Hospital, Chief Surgeon Rick Jolly could barely cope with the wounded.
Helicopter after helicopter arrived at Ajax Bay and disgorged these loads of Welsh Guardsmen, the majority of whom had 10% flash burns. In other words, they only had skin hanging off the hands and faces. I gave up counting after 100. I told the divisional headquarters, we need help. And to my surprise, the divisional headquarters said, why? When I told them how many casualties I had already, and I estimated it at 130, they were stunned. And I had to go to these young Welsh Guardsmen and say to them, I'm sorry, I can't treat you. We've got too many of you. And yet these young Welshmen all said to me in their sing-song voices, don't worry about me, sir. You look after my mate. Have you seen him? Ellis, Evans, Williams. And they marched off into the night without a word of complaint. Even now, it makes me feel so proud.
Two landing ships were smoking wrecks, and the Welsh Guards were broken as a serious fighting force before they'd fired a single shot. The disaster at Bluff Cove cost the lives of 50 men, with 150 wounded. After the bombing of Sir Galahad, the remnants of 5 Brigade continued with their mission to take the mountains above Port Stanley. The formidable Tumbledown Mountain was held by Argentina's 5th Marine Battalion, well-trained professional soldiers. The task of taking it fell to the Scots Guards. The day before the assault, its senior officers climbed Goat Ridge, overlooking Tumbledown. Major John Kisley commanded a company of 150 men.
We looked through binoculars to see where the best way up it might be. I thought it looked rather forbidding, rather steep, and very craggy. And in the afternoon, I held an orders group, and they were saying to me, "Come on, sir, what's it going to be like?" And I was saying, "It's going to be a tough fight, and we're going to win it." And I suppose those simple sorts of things were maybe the things they wanted to hear.
As dusk fell, 600 guardsmen prepared for battle. There is no visual record. The unfolding drama is relived through some of the men who fought there. Unusually, the Scots Guards were ordered to wear berets when they went into action.
And we knew that the outline of the Argentines' tin helmets could give them away in the silhouette. We believed, so that we could identify our own men and not see this outline in the darkness, that we should wear berets.
Commanding Officer Colonel Mike Scott had also come up with a clever password.
An expression well known to every Scotsman, particularly Glaswegians, is "Hey Jimmy!" And so that was our password. And the other beauty of it, of course, was we knew the Argentinians couldn't pronounce a J. So if an Argentinian heard what was going on and thought, I'll copy that password, he would say, "Hey, Himmy."
Tumbledown would become a battle that the Scots Guards came close to losing. Spearheading the attack were 30 men from 13 Platoon. They were in the thick of the fighting all night. Early in the advance, their platoon sergeant, the most experienced man, was shot dead. Lance Sergeant Tom McGuinness found himself unofficially running the platoon.
At this stage, I wasn't scared, I wasn't thinking of being a hero, and I also wasn't thinking, because I believed at that time, the minute that I stopped to think would be the time that someone could shoot me.
The Argentines soon had 13 Platoon pinned down. With heavy fire raining down, McGuinness clambered up steep rocks above the enemy.
I could hear Argentine voices directly below me, the voices of possibly 5 or 6 Argentine men. I started throwing grenades down, both high explosives and phosphorus grenades. You could hear the screaming, you could hear the shouting, and I continued to throw these grenades. I probably only needed 2 or 3 grenades, but I probably threw about 20.
The Argentine bunker positions were protected by snipers. McGuinness knew he had to take them out.
There was a guardsman, Billy Silver, and Billy said to me, Sergeant, there's one over here." I got a 66mm anti-tank weapon. The sniper actually put his head back up over the rock. I fired the anti-tank weapon. The following day they found a body without a head.
In spite of McGuinness's brave efforts, in over 4 hours the platoon had made little ground. Company Commander John Kisley knew time was running out.
Clearly this was serious business. The commanding officer was telling me as much on the radio, that the whole success of the night's operations depended on my company getting to the top in darkness.
And I started to get concerned, because my worry was what was going to happen come dawn if we hadn't taken Tumbledown, if the Argentinians still had a presence on Tumbledown, and starting to go through my mind was, what was I going to do about it?
He was saying, you're the guy on the ground, you're the guy nearest to the problem, you solve it in your own way, but as quickly as possible.
With covering fire coming from Lance Sergeant McGuinness and 13 Platoon, John Kisley and 40 men began a do-or-die assault on the rocks towards the summit.
We started charging up the slopes of Mount Tumbledown, moving forward in small groups, firing as we went. The enemy were fighting in a very determined fashion. And certainly on one occasion I ran out of ammunition and had to use my bayonet.
John Kisley himself certainly bayoneted one Argentinian, if not two. Now that's quite sharp for a company commander.
Probably at this stage he'd taken probably 50–60% casualties, and probably another 10–20% actually thought they were casualties and just lay there.
And by the time we reached the last crest, there were only, I think, 7 of us. We looked down a distance in front of us and we could see the lights of Port Stanley, which was a huge surprise because I had imagined Stanley would be blacked out. And we stood there stock still in amazement, which was a very stupid thing to do because right then a machine gun opened up about 200 yards ahead of us and 3 of the group were hit.
By dawn, the 12-hour battle to take Mount Tumbledown was over. 9 guardsmen were dead and 43 wounded.
It was a pretty chaotic scene. There were a number of wounded people being tended to. There were stretcher parties lifting people back down the hill. And away in the distance, one could see some of the opposition running back down into Port Stanley. A chaotic scene.
The Guards waited for a counterattack from General Menendez in Stanley. As at Mount Longdon, no counterattack ever came.
I passed by the commanding officer, Mike Scott. Mike Scott was probably getting a bit upset, and all he turned around and said was, why couldn't these bastards have surrendered yesterday, which would have saved his men.
You'd think you'd look like people who'd won Wimbledon or something. We didn't. We were shattered. We were very, very glad to be alive. We had lost some of our mates. I was very worried about some of the people who'd been wounded, whether they were going to survive.
People had lost legs, people had lost arms. And not one of them cried, not one of them screamed. Every one of them, in good guardsman fashion, just sat there. Not a word from any of them. Some of them were actually rolling their own cigarettes, just a stump, and sitting rolling their own cigarettes. And whether it was shock or not, I don't know. But looking back, it was extremely difficult, but they made you so, so proud.
Film cameras recorded the tragic aftermath of the battle.
While the pipers played, the Scots Guardsmen who had died were taken to battalion headquarters. And there they were covered with whatever was available until they could be taken back to Blue Beach, where they were buried in the makeshift cemetery there. In training exercises, at the conclusion, there is a big shout, "Endex." It means it's all over. And at that point, all the dead stand up. The difference here was they didn't.
With Tumbledown taken, the Argentine army was now in full retreat. With the defeat of the crack 5th Marine Battalion on Mount Tumbledown, Argentine troops were in headlong retreat to Port Stanley. General Menendez, the Argentine commander in Stanley, had lost the last of his mountain defences. General Galtieri, the head of Argentina's military junta, urged him by phone to counterattack.
He told me he was convinced the English were tired, that perhaps I didn't know exactly where my troops were, and they could come out of the holes and counterattack instead of withdrawing. I said, I believe any continuation of the resistance will lead to a great loss of life for the sake of a few more hours.
Even though his troops outnumbered the British 2-1, Menendez knew his only hope of victory was fighting street by street.
It was almost all wood. If we were going to fight, it was all going to burn down, and that would be a disaster for the civilian population.
Menendez surrendered. British Gurkhas on Mount William, which overlooked Stanley, were the first to report the Argentine collapse.
Gentlemen, I've just heard that the white flag is flying over Stanley. Hooray! Very marvellous. 8-2, Roger, out. What he has said is there appears to be a ceasefire at the moment, and the Argentinian forces in the Falklands have appeared to have surrendered. Negotiations will start tonight.
Led by an SAS colonel, a 2-man British negotiating team flew into Stanley. Argentine troops witnessed the bizarre sight of 2 British officers strolling into Government House. They told Menendez a surrender would stop further bloodshed, and tribute would be paid to the bravery of Argentine soldiers.
Talks began. I pointed out that if what they said about the bravery of the Argentines had any worth, they had to include some specific conditions in the surrender document, and that the war flags from every unit had to return to mainland Argentina. The British consulted by radio, and they told me that was okay.
The day after the surrender, British troops marched into Stanley. They had trekked 65 miles across the island. Outnumbered, they'd fought fierce battles. And they'd won.
The Argentines should have won, yeah. They should have won. They didn't, because they didn't get their act together. Their leadership was poor. Their officers all looked pretty sleek and well fed. And I think this is symptomatic of a conscript army where you've actually got 2 classes of people. You've got regulars who are officers and NCOs, and then you've got the rest who are all conscripts, and they're regarded as cannon fodder.
It was the day that the war ended. I flew in and landed at Government House. And then we walked up the main street of Stanley. And it was an extraordinary sight how much mess the Argentine troops actually made of Stanley at the time. And it was a mess. I mean, every now and again you'd come across huge piles of surrendered weapons. There was no elation. We had no celebrations at all. There was a sense of relief that it was all over, that we had done the job that we had been sent to do, and we had done it successfully, but with the statement that this sort of thing wouldn't be stood for. So there was no elation. There was tremendous sympathy for the Argentine soldier conscripts.
Well, my first night in Stanley was spent in a house which was occupied mainly by B Company of 2 para. In the kitchen, we found a whole lot of Argentine rations and poured the whole lot into a big pot. And we got our spoons out of our pockets and dug into the pot. And we also liberated some plastic bottles of Argentine red wine and had a sip or 2 of that.
Those last 24 hours, I didn't sleep.
Comí muy poco.
I ate very little.
Después de firmar la
After signing the
rendición,
surrender, I ate even less.
General Menendez was taken and held on HMS Fearless, where battlefield surgeon Rick Jolly went in to see him.
And I said, "Sir, I want to thank you for surrendering when you did, because you saved a lot of young men's lives, and you saved my doctors an awful lot of work. Thank you, sir." I saluted because I really meant it. And he looked at me, and the 2 staff officers next door to him translated it at high speed. And he looked at me, and his face broke into a smile, and he said, "See, see," and he got out of his chair and shook my hand.
Task Force Commander Admiral Woodward was more critical of Menendez. He refused to see him.
By going on as long as he did, he caused a lot more people to be killed. I didn't trust myself to be civil to him, and I didn't see any need to be civil to him. He wasn't a friend exactly, or at all.
For Argentina, the war was a catastrophe, militarily, politically, and economically. 746 men were killed and nearly 1,000 wounded. After their initial success seizing Port Stanley, they failed to win a single victory. General Menendez was held responsible and court-martialed. More importantly, the military junta that ordered the invasion was soon driven from power. The British had 252 dead, their biggest loss since the Korean War. The entire population of the Falkland Islands was just 2,400. In fighting over its sovereignty, 1,000 British and Argentine servicemen had lost their lives. After the victory, Padre David Cooper held a service at Stanley Cathedral for the men in his parachute regiment.
We have all experienced events in the last 4 weeks that have probably changed our lives considerably.
You could look at a person and you could see right into his soul, because the battlefield strips you of all pretense. And we really did value each other for what we were truly worth, not what we wanted each other to think we were worth.
What I would ask you to remember is what you felt when you thought you were going to die. And when you get home, and you've been back home 4 or 5 weeks, and you're beginning to take your wife or your girlfriend or your dog for granted, well, just remember what is important and try to model and mould your life on that.
5 months after the Falklands had been invaded, the task force sailed home. But the men who came back had changed.
The immediate effect of the Falklands War on me was that material things didn't matter once you get back to the real world, and that money, houses, mortgages, that they're not all that important, and that people are much more important.
I was a young man when I went down to the Falklands. I was 22. There were a good deal of sharp edges to the boy who went down. The war knocked quite a lot of those sharp edges off.
There is a very striking difference in the eyes, particularly, of young men who have experienced battle, and it becomes a very private thing between the comrades who were on that battlefield, and it's something which is very difficult to share with other people.
I think a lot of us were grateful that, in the first place, that we'd survived. All right, some of us quite seriously wounded, but we were alive, and I think that counted for an awful lot.
When I look back on this campaign, I'm left with an extraordinary contradiction, that it's through this kind of hardship and really through this kind of suffering that you begin to see the best in people. Soldiers doing things for their colleagues and for the enemy that, in a sense, in peacetime you don't ever see. It's an enormous paradox, and the tragedy may well be that human beings are prepared to give so much to war and yet give so little to peace.
Our Falklands Week continues tomorrow at 9. If you were affected by the war, then we want to hear from you. Log on to thehistorychannel.co.uk to share your stories and memories of the conflict. Next, dogfights of the Vietnam War.